Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to episode 39. Can you believe it's 39? 39 of Monorail Memoirs. Today we're going to be discussing Disney Quest. Was it ahead of its time? Before we get into what Disney Quest was and what our thoughts on it were, Lauren, how are you?
I'm tired today. Long week at work, but I'm good.
It's snowing here, so don't give me that nonsense.
Wow.
Genuinely is snowing outside as we're filming this now. I need to go for a run later. Yay for me. Disney Quest then. What was Disney Quest? Disney Quest was an interactive theme park. This was located for about 20 years. It existed in downtown Disney, as it was called then, and it was a theme park, a bit of a virtual theme park indoors. Now, why are people like us still talking about this? It's nostalgia filled. It was of its time, and I think Disney tried something a bit different, and it was probably a bit too early.
Yeah, definitely. I think that some of the technology was kind of clunky. Uh,
Yes.
Even when it was installed and it was new and it was exciting, because it was so new, the technology, it hadn't had time to really grow and innovate.
Yeah. Let me take you through what a day in Disney Quest actually looked like. So you would walk into
Oh,
this central lobby, nostalgia there, and there was some lifts at the back, elevators for our American folks. There were some lifts at the back, and you would have a journey up to what was the mid level. This was set over 5 stories. You would come out of the mid level, and there would be narration provided by the genie from Aladdin, of course, played by Robin Williams. There were a few massive attractions here. I just want to touch across a couple of what I would call my favorite ones. There was Pirates of the Caribbean. This was a ride on the second story where you would wear 3D glasses and you would have these cannons on half a ship. You would have a wraparound screen and you would fire at these cannons. And depending on how well you did, depending on how much gold you got, and you had a boss battle at the end, it was fantastic. But just look at the quality of this picture. This tells you all you need to know about the graphics at the time. I do think it put experience ahead of graphics, but that was one of the things you could do. One of my other favorite ones was the virtual jungle cruise. So this was a raft that you sat in. So it'd be two at the front, two at the back. You'd sit in there, and this blue tarpaulin would quite literally elevate as it was filled with air, and you were given these paddles that you would use to ride down the river, picking left or right accordingly. And you'd be presented with dinosaurs on one side or the other, and it was narrated. And the whole idea was it was a bit of like a real life jungle cruise. I have many examples, but the only other one that I want to touch on is something called Cyberspace Mountain. Now, Cyberspace Mountain was, in my view, the best attraction in Disney Quest. What you would do is you would go to a terminal. You would, utilizing a certain amount of track, you would build your theoretical make-believe roller coaster. You would then go and sit in a simulator and ride the roller coaster you just built. And it was like, how many upside downs can we get? And I think our record was 13 or something, but that was so far ahead of its time. It felt revolutionary. It was virtual reality before virtual reality was really a thing. It gave such interactive storytelling, which was part of Disney, but there were a lot of problems with it, weren't there, Lauren?
yeah, absolutely. I think that it was quite clunky, and the technology was ahead of its time. You've got to think about the time that we were at. You're looking at it now from a 2026 lens and thinking, wow, that technology was really clunky, that was really old, and da. But at the time, especially as a kid, it just felt so futuristic. I thought I'd literally stepped like 2 decades ahead of my.
There was a lightning in a bottle moment about it, but I think because the technology where it was, it was started in the late 90s, went on for 20 years. It was 2017 in the end that it was cancelled. The technology aged badly and
Yeah.
quickly because the exponential rate of growth and change was quicker than they could keep up with, and I think the experiences weren't updated often enough in line with technology.
I think that they made too permanent a structure for a lot of the rides that you mentioned. So, for example, Cyberspace Mountain was a very, very, very permanent structure. You had so many different of these simulators. You couldn't just chop and change those as and when. Similarly, the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, yes, you could probably update the graphics, but you couldn't update the actual boats without shutting it down for a significant period of time. So I think that the idea was there, but with them having such permanent structures within the building itself, didn't lend itself to innovation, really.
But do you think the reason why we have such a nostalgic feel about it is Disney has struggled to entertain the teen market for a long time? That's been Universal's domain for a while, and I would argue still continues to do so.
Yeah.
We were teenagers when this was in its prime, and it was an environment where our parents could say, cool, you can go in here for a few hours, we're going to go shopping in downtown Disney, have lunch or whatever, meet us by the door at this time. And it was an enclosed environment, a safe environment that allowed teenagers to go and play video games for 4 hours. It was where now, when everyone's got access to, home game consoles and things, PC gaming, I don't think it holds the same appeal to go to a location to play games.
No, because, I mean, without sounding old, kids nowadays, they can just put on their VR headsets and they're wherever they want to be. Whereas we never had that growing up. I think the best that we got was iToy, which was a tiny...
The PS2!
Yeah.
Yes! And you would wave around and do bubbles and things.
Yeah, and I mean, it was fun and, all that sort of stuff. But being in Disney and then having that level of immersion within a kind of theme park of just computer games was amazing. And I mean, I know that you and our cousin Bill massive into computer games. I wasn't, but I still absolutely loved it there because it was so practical and fairly easy to grasp. One of the other things that really struck me was the Astro Blasters, Buzz Lightyear.
Yes.
You could go around in kind of like these little go-kart things. You had two of you. One was the driver. The other one was kind of collecting balls and then putting them down a chute and firing them at each other. So it was kind of like dodgeball meet bumper cars.
Yep.
It was ace.
But don't you think though that again, we're looking back at this with nostalgia.
Absolutely.
I think part of what two things I think is why DisneyQuest actually failed. One was the Walt Disney Corporation did not put the investment in required to keep it up to date. Yeah. Now, I'm not making a judgment on the profit and loss margin. I don't know what it was. I don't know what the attendance figures were. I don't know how much money they made from it or lost. But if they were going to succeed in this long term, there would have to be a growth or at least an investment strategy for decades that they just gave up on. So that's point one. Point two, and I think this is an issue that we have as we're talking about this now. How on earth do you describe it? There's arcades on one floor. There's like a Pirates of the Caribbean thing where you shoot cannons. There's an Astro Blaster where you're sitting in a go-kart that's got a shell on it and you drive over balls and you shoot them at people. Like, it's so hard to explain. And because it was at a time when gaming was for either nerds or people in our age bracket, trying to explain to people outside of that, they wouldn't get it and they'd have no interest. And so one of the things that Disney does really well is it tries to appeal to a very broad cross-section, both in terms of background, age, financially, etc. Well, this was so narrow, it was never going to have a long-term premium feel to the products that was being produced.
Yeah, you're totally right. The theme parks are for everybody. You see the family of four with the two young children, but you also see the Disney adults and, that massive stretch, and also kind of like the grandparents, the great grandparents. I mean, heck, our grandma still goes and she's rocking on 80 and she's doing amazing. But yeah, she still goes and she still enjoys it. Whereas you definitely would not see that spread in DisneyQuest. And you're right, I feel like they kind of filtered down the market quite a lot to, as you say, teens and people who like video games. I do think, though, for the teenagers, as you say, it was a massive independence giver because we would never be left alone, like in the parks or anything like that, because it's quite an open space. You could get lost and all that sort of stuff. Whereas even though as a teen it felt vast, it mustn't have been that big because when you look at the outside building,
yeah, and context is important here, right? Because this was back before there wasn't Wi-Fi in the buildings. We didn't all have technology-enabled phones, and so it really was a case of we'll see you in 4 hours. Like it was like.
I mean, we went text or ring our parents because it cost an arm and a leg because we were British in America, whereas now people take that for granted that a lot of kind of plans are free over there. So we had no means of communication with our parents.
It was like emergency or nothing. So that's why we didn't, that's why it was a real sort of independence giver, as you say. And, I remember us going and ordering pizza there and feeling like, adults went fifth floor, because the fifth floor was put it this way, this is the age, right? The fifth floor was the internet cafe and like the eatery. And I remember sitting in those booths and sort of they had computer screens on the wall. You can do internet cafe, you send emails and things. And, I suppose my question is then, or the question is, was DisneyQuest ahead of its time? I would say maybe. And I know that's a real cop-out, but it was ahead of its time in the sense that VR and augmented reality is becoming far more common now, far more understood by a greater increasing range of people. But I also think it was bang on in the sense that it appealed to a market that Disney beforehand had struggled with. And due to a lack of long-term investment strategy, the technology got outdated so quickly.
Yeah, definitely. I think with that sort of thing, you need that, as you say, that constant investment in the technology and in the advancements. And it would never be a finished product. Whereas I feel like they just kind of went, here you go, this is what we've got, and left it. And you cannot do that with technology.
No, I agree. Well, thank you all for joining us this week. Did you ever go to DisneyQuest? And if you did, please let us know what your favorite experience was and why Cyberspace Mountain was the best. It's a pleasure as always. We'll see you again next week. And until then, please stand clear of the doors. Bye, everybody.
Bye.